Daniel Turbow. He is a retired family judge, and he is also an attorney. He is the son of Polish Holocaust survivors, and he has had a personal interest in Eleanor's work, having known Eleanor for so long and then been there from the beginning of the Mémoire project. So Daniel has been researching and reading up, preparing a presentation to tell us about the events surrounding this, the memorial plaques, the historical facts behind it. So over to you, Daniel.
Hi. Hello, everyone. I must say that that's a hard act to follow. As I was introduced and as I was listening to Eleanor, I thought of how far back this goes and all the effort and thought that she's put into it. The actual artwork is astonishing. It's unfortunate that many of you don't have the opportunity to see it live. Nonetheless, the opportunity to see it online is really special. And I hope that through some of my comments today, I will help enhance your ability to appreciate the work and to perhaps learn more about what has gone on in the context of Holocaust memorials, memory, life in France, and the like. It is rare to have such a confluence of interesting and occasionally difficult topics brought to the fore in this manner. Now, I wanted to start by reviewing some of the text that Eleanor has alluded to already. And I hope you can see the screen of this painting. The translation is here, and it too speaks about the deportation of students because they were born Jews, and in the active complicity of the Vichy government with the Nazi occupants. The following is very similar. It alludes, however, as well to the roundup of Jews in 1942 through 1944 by order of the Vichy government in active complicity with the Nazi occupying forces. And the last work that I'll look at with you right now for a moment is a painting that involves another roundup. And by roundup, we mean what the words suggest, that large numbers of Jews were picked up by the French police, rounded up, and in this case, put into a stadium called the Velodrome d'Hiver, which means the velodrome was where bicycle races were had, and it was in the winter. D'Hiver is winter, so it's the winter bicycle race stadium. And this roundup, which in French is called a rafle, you'll excuse my pronunciation, it's R-A-F-L-E, was the most notorious, and we'll talk about it to some great extent in a little while. This roundup resulted in the apprehension of over 13,000 Jews, 2,900 women, 4,000 children, and virtually none of them were returned alive to France after being shipped to Auschwitz. Now, we've heard a lot about Vichy, we've heard a lot about roundups, and I'd like to explain and provide something of a historical background to that. This was a map of Europe just before the war started in 1939. immediately thereafter, Germany invaded Poland and the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east on September 1st, 1939. France and England had guaranteed the safety of Poland. And as a result of that invasion by the Germans, France and England found themselves in a state of war with the Germans. However, nothing happened. From September 1939 until the spring of 1940, virtually nothing happened. There was virtually no guns drawn, no shots fired. It was a period called the phony war. And rather than preparing for real activity, the French leaned back a bit. They had hard memories of the carnage of World War I. They also knew they'd won that war. So they were quite a bit overconfident. And they had very little enthusiasm for going all out in battle. Moreover, its generals were certain that it was safe behind this huge system of forts it had built along its border with Germany, known as the Maginot Line. North of that line was Luxembourg, Belgium, and the Netherlands, and the Ardennes forests, which lies between those. And the French generals were quite confident that nobody could get through the Ardennes forest, and therefore they were safe from the Germans as a result. The phony war ended in November 1940, in June 1940, and the Germans got through the Ardennes and they got beyond the Maginot Line simply by avoiding it. This map reflects how the Germans went through the Low Countries, and they quickly overran the French. Holland fell on May 14th, Belgium fell on May 17th, and very shortly thereafter, the French government abandoned Paris just ahead of the entering German troops on June 10th. They went down to Bordeaux, hopefully finding safety there, but chaos reigned. The prime minister, a gentleman by the name of Paul Renault, and a little-known general by the name of Charles de Gaulle, with the encouragement of the British, thought they should fight on. However, a defeatist gloom had fallen over the country and most of its leadership, and they were shell-shocked by the German onslaught. As a result, Renault was forced to resign, and he was, hello? And he was replaced by Marshal Philippe Pétain, who was an 84-year-old military man who was revered nationally as a hero of World War I. He agreed to an armistice, which was signed on June 22nd. Here you have a picture of Pétain meeting with Hitler as the armistice was being signed.
2 days after Paris fell, the new Prime Minister, Marshal Pétain, asked the Germans for an armistice. Renault had been opposed to a separate peace and resigned. In most of France, the news of an armistice was received with relief. The German triumphal parade followed the exact route of the French victory procession after the First World War. It had taken the Wehrmacht just 5 weeks to humble their historic foe. words of Winston Churchill, the Battle of France was now over. The Battle of Britain was about to begin.
Will this work? The armistice divided France into two different zones, an occupied zone, which you see here, and an ostensible non-occupied free zone in the south. The capital of that zone was Vichy. The city of Vichy was chosen largely because Pétain had come from there. When we refer to the Vichy regime, we now know what we're talking about. Now, under the terms of the armistice, technically, Vichy was an independent nation. It was a puppet nation of the Germans, but it was an independent nation. The occupied part of France was ruled by the Germans. However, the Vichy French cooperated with the Germans, or in the words that we now know, collaborated with the Germans, and they participated in the German activities, in the hostile activities towards the people of the residents of France, and they cooperated and collaborated in the South. Now, there's a lot of stuff that we could talk about in detail about the legalities of who controlled what and why Vichy surrendered or entered into an armistice. And a lot of people have been debating until now whether they should have surrendered or whether they shouldn't have, and or whether they should have entered into the armistice or not. And it pays to spend a few moments to talk about why they did so. And this requires a little bit of discussion of history. Many on the French right, including the press, the Catholic Church, and business owners, were not entirely unhappy with the Nazi victory. Throughout the 1930s, liberal democracy was losing ground in Europe. Look at Germany, look at Italy, look at Spain, where the Civil War had led to Franco's victory. Many Eastern European countries also had moved to leadership by strong men. And during that time, for a variety of reasons, France too had been in much turmoil. In February 1934, there had been a near coup d'etat by the right wing, brought on in some measure by a government financial scandal arising from a massive fraud committed by a con man named Stavisky, who happened to be a Russian Jew. By the way, there's a movie with Jean-Paul Belmondo called Stavisky. He ultimately committed suicide, but the scandal enhanced the sense of, or the trend of anti-Semitism that was just below the surface in France. In 1936, the Popular Front, led by socialist Leon Blum, came into power, and he, in cooperation with the Communist Party, brought about massive social change, which many on the right did not welcome, such as paid leave for workers and the 40-hour work week. The fact that he was Jewish also stoked the anti-Semitic fires. And those anti-Semitic fires showed themselves to be very forceful because, in the language of many French at the time, they thought better Hitler than Blum, or many argued that it was better to have fascism than the communism that they feared was going to come along with if Blum stayed in power. Now, although the armistice purported to guarantee the continuation of French state, the state was a truncated one. but it could ostensibly rebuild under the resolute and incorruptible leadership of Pétain and his deputy, Pierre Laval, who wished to return to an essential conservative Catholic rural country that they considered the real France. And part of their efforts, and very strong and perhaps the essential strand of their efforts, hinged upon anti-Semitism. Now, we don't have time to explore the roots of French anti-Semitism, but it long preceded the Dreyfus Affair, which many of you know about, which involved the trumped up espionage charges on a Jewish French officer. But it's safe to say that the Vichy regime and many of its supporters followed the well-thumbed script of societies that identify Jews as the cause of their problems when they turn inward and seek a national renewal and a restoration of traditional values, as did Pétain, in which he called the process the Révolution Nationale. Here he is in that poster. And instead of, can you see at the very top, oops, instead of liberté, égalité, and fraternity, they have work, family, and country. Here is one of the propaganda posters that came out at that time. As you see, here is a nice, orderly France. And here is the one that is controlled by the international Jewish conspiracy, juiveism, together with parliament, egoism, communism, demagoguery, laziness, internationalism. And here you see the Vichy regime speaking about the international Jewish conspiracy. Complot means conspiracy. The Vichy regime put its money where its mouth was. Among other things, it enacted anti-Jewish laws modeled on the Nuremberg laws. Indeed, as you'll hear in a little while, they were even more severe. They defined Jews based on racial criteria and introduced discriminatory measures excluding them from various professions. The Jews were expelled from public office. They had their access to education and public services restricted, and many who were naturalized citizens had their citizenship removed. Businesses and other private property were confiscated. Most importantly, for these purposes, we have to recognize that the Vichy regime participated knowingly and forcefully in the Nazi effort to carry out the final solution of murdering all of Europe's Jews. Now, we're speaking in the broadest outlines here, and there have been libraries filled with books that discuss these issues. And to fully explore the matter and come to many conclusions is difficult in the time that's allotted. So I think you should know, however, that not all of the actions of Vichy were consistent. At times, it treated native-born Jews differently than those who had been naturalized, who had entered from other countries as refugees. Jews were, in fact, treated somewhat differently in the North, in occupied France, than they were in Free France, in Vichy France. However, as Eleanor pointed out, altogether, It is estimated that approximately 75,000 of the approximately 350,000 Jews living in France at the beginning of the war were rounded up by Vichy French police, detained in French facilities, and deported to concentration camps, primarily Auschwitz. Of the 75,000, only 2,500 survived. Now, as I mentioned at the outset, the most notorious of the roundups was in Paris at a stadium called the Vélodrome d'Hiver. And this was an operation conducted with the full cooperation of the French police, together with representatives of Adolf Eichmann, who, as many of you know, was responsible for the final solution. Here you have people being led to the Vélodrome.
Par une belle journée d'été, la police parisienne, supervisée par les services de la SS et de la Gestapo en territoire occupé, organise une journée d'arrestation de juifs dans la capitale. Cette journée entrera dans la triste histoire de la persécution raciale sous le nom de rafle du Veldi. Vous savez que les Allemands n'avaient d'abord prévu de n'arrêter que les gens compris entre 16, enfin au-dessus de 16 ans, donc de ne pas arrêter les enfants. Et la police parisienne qui a accompli la rafle du 16 juillet, avec un zèle au-dessus de toute éloge, enfin, elle a eu des éloges de la part des Allemands, a arrêté les enfants. Et on s'est donc trouvé avec à peu près 4051 enfants qui étaient au Vélodrome d'Hiver, qui pleuraient, qui salissaient leurs culottes et qui ont posé aux assistantes sociales que j'ai revues, qui étaient en général des femmes, des quakers, des protestants, des problèmes extrêmement aigus. Et comme il n'était pas prévu de déporter ces enfants, que les Allemands ne les avaient pas prévus, on a déporté les parents, enfin, au camp de Pitié et de la Rolande, et puis on a donc séparé les enfants des parents dans l'attente d'une décision. Et Eichmann a envoyé, ou plutôt Roch, qui était le représentant d'Eichmann en France, a envoyé un télégramme à Berlin pour demander ce qu'il fallait faire de ces enfants. Et dans l'attente, Laval a envoyé il faut déporter également les enfants. Ceci est rapporté par un télégramme de Dannecker, qui était donc le représentant de la du SD en France. Et ce télégramme, tout le monde peut le consulter. Il est aux archives du CDJC. Et il est authentifié, à mon avis, par deux choses. C'est d'une part par l'interview de Pasteur Bugner, qui est allé trouver Laval pour plaider la cause des enfants. Et Bugner rapporte, lorsque j'ai parlé de ces enfants, en particulier de la possibilité de les faire évacuer peut-être sur l'Amérique, Laval m'a répondu, ça fait rien, ça n'a pas d'importance, je fais de la prophylaxie. Je m'excuse.
Now, this collaboration is only part of the story. There was a resistance which was strong and critically important. We know that the French government was Vichy. We know that many French idolized Pétain, but we also know that there were many, many brave French resistors. Some were active members of the resistance, helping the Allied cause with arms or sabotage and radio work, etc. Many hid Jews or other fugitives. Also, even though the Catholic Church itself failed to speak up against Vichy, individual clergymen spoke out, and many Protestant pastors risked their lives to help Jewish children. However, the Vichy regime instilled fear and admiration in many of its corners, and there were many people who found comfort in the Vichy regime and participated completely with them. For example, there were paramilitary organizations known as La Milice, or the militia, which were created and searched out Jews or members of the resistance. There was actually a division of French soldiers who fought with the SS on the Eastern Front. Now, it's easy for us to look back at this time and say, well, Vichy, the collaborators were bad and should have been condemned. But I think, and as I wrote this and thought about this, we're troubled consistently with the problem of what would we do if we were in the same situation. There were many French people who simply wanted to get along with their lives. They did not want to participate one way or another in the war, and they wanted to make a living. And if they had to close their eyes, they would close their eyes. There were some called horizontal collaborators, women, who partnered with the Germans, and some had children with them. Many of you have seen Casablanca, where there's a French woman who's having a relationship with a German man, and it's roundly condemned. Those people, after the war, were condemned as well. But what would any of us do if we found ourselves in that situation? Here's a strange story.
La Deuxième Guerre, c'est-à-dire au moment de la défaite, comment avez-vous réagi?
Et ça ne nous a pas bien fait plaisir. Hein. Nous, en tant qu'anciens combattants de 14-18,
Oui,
la défaite nous a touchés énormément. Hein.
oui. Il y avait beaucoup de magasins juifs ici dans cette
Oui.
rue, je crois.
Oui.
Alors
oui.
vous avez dû voir pas mal de choses.
Eh ben, c'est-à-dire, oui, ils sont partis, hein, n'est-ce pas, ils se sont exilés.
Ils sont exilés, mais il n'y a pas eu d'arrestation.
Aussi un peu partout.
Oui, vous les avez vus.
Hélas, oui.
Dites-moi, au moment de la parution ce qu'on appelle les décrets juifs, il paraît que vous avez fait paraître une annonce à ce moment-là. C'est une annonce dans le Moniteur.
Ah ben vous êtes bien renseigné, monsieur.
Oui, oui.
C'est exact.
Oui.
Figurez-vous, monsieur, nous étions 4 frères. C'est la réponse que j'y ai faite. Parce qu'il me disait juif. J'ai mon nom qui est à consonance juive, puisque je m'appelle Klein.
Oui.
Je suis,
Oui.
et je suis catholique quand même.
Oui.
Alors j'ai eu des inquiétudes, on m'a inquiété à ce sujet.
Oui.
Alors j'ai répondu, ayant eu 4 frères mobilisés,
Oui.
et ma foi j'ai été franchi.
C'est ça. C'est-à-dire que vous avez tenu vis-à-vis de votre clientèle à ce moment-là à dire que vous n'étiez pas juif.
C'est exact.
Oui. Mais pour quel motif?
Ben parce qu'ils savaient par eux que j'étais juif et puis qu'on arrêtait les juifs et puis qu'on était tous contre les juifs.
Oui.
Comprenez-vous? Mais j'ai dit, il n'y a pas de raison, je ne peux pas m'intituler juif du fait que je suis catholique.
C'est ça.
Comprenez-vous? Alors c'est là que j'ai fait, comme vous dites si bien, j'ai fait paraître une annonce, ayant eu 4 frères en guerre,
Oui.
comprenez-vous, dont un a été tué,
Oui.
et les 3 autres prisonniers. Donc,
oui, mais enfin, il y a des tas de juifs qui ont eu aussi des frères tués pendant la guerre de 14.
Écoutez, je n'ai jamais fait de racisme.
Oui.
Alors qu'il soit juif, qu'il soit mahométan, je voyais qu'une chose, celui qui faisait son devoir, je le considérais comme français, comme moi, comme les autres.
C'est ça.
Comprenez-vous?
how many of us would have had the power, the courage to resist? Now, a strange thing happened after the war. During the first few months, there was a period of extreme retribution against some of the known collaborators, some following very summary trials, if there were trials at all. A low estimate is that at least 10,000 people were killed during what was called the Savage Purge. Pierre Laval, who was the second in command after Pétain, was executed following a trial. Pétain was sentenced to death following a trial, but that sentence was commuted and he lived imprisoned until 1951. Yet after that period, very little happened to punish some of the worst offenders. And the legend grew that all of France resisted. On the other hand, nobody spoke of Vichy. Indeed, the failure to come to grips with that regime's crimes gave birth to what one historian has dubbed Vichy syndrome, the collective guilt, shame, and denial that many people felt with regard to Vichy. Now, there are many possible interrelated reasons for that phenomenon, but one is plainly a function of Charles de Gaulle's leadership. When Pétain agreed to the armistice, de Gaulle, whom I mentioned earlier, was not in favor of the armistice, flew to England, where in an act of unparalleled chutzpah, I hope everybody knows what chutzpah means. It means balls or temerity. Without an army and without funds and without a square inch of his own national soil to stand upon, cajoled Churchill to give him a spot on BBC, where on June 18th, he declared himself the leader of the, quote, Free French, and called upon his countrymen to follow him in resisting the Nazis until they were ultimately defeated. As he wrote, as he said, if the powers of freedom ultimately triumph over those of servitude, what will be the fate of a France which has submitted to the enemy? Honor, common sense, and the interests of the country require that all free Frenchmen, wherever they be, should continue the fight the best they may. I, General de Gaulle, am undertaking this national task here in England. I call upon all French servicemen of the land, sea, and air forces. I call upon the leaders, together with all soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the French land and sea and air forces, together with wherever they may be, to get in touch with me. I call upon the Frenchmen who want to remain free to listen to my voice and follow me. Long live free France in honor and independence. As one writer put it, de Gaulle had nothing except his uniform and his voice. No one ever played a weaker hand more compellingly. His life was one long, brilliant bluff, and the things that made him exasperating, his vanity and his closed-mindedness, his unearned sense of superiority and egocentric blindness, was also why the bluffs worked. He convinced others sitting at the card table with all the aces in their hands that he might somehow manufacture an extra ace by pure force of will. Now, by making himself the symbol of the entire resistance and making himself the symbol of France, there was no room for the France of Vichy. Put another way, he unified the spirit of France and the spirit of the resistance. And so where you had the first, you necessarily had the second. Thus, the myth that all France resisted grew. And with it grew the force of the collective amnesia that we now might call the Vichy syndrome. Now that started to change slowly in 1969, 1970, when a film called The Sorrow and the Pity was released. Most of the clips that I'm showing to you now come from that film, and I apologize for the poor technical quality. It's largely just a collection of interviews with people who were alive during that time, both French members of the resistance, French supporters of Vichy, some German soldiers, some French soldiers. And the director of the film, Marcel Ophuls, went to pains to be neutral, just let those people tell their story. And the story it told was of life in a city not far from Vichy called Clermont-Ferrand. And the story painted a very ugly picture of life in France during the time of the occupation. Although it also shows the brilliant acts of the resistance, it clearly conveys the impression that there were many, many terrible things happening. Significantly, even though it was filmed for French TV, it was not shown until 1981, largely because of concerns that it would be too controversial, or in the language of one government official, it exposed myths that France still needed. Nonetheless, it won the 1972 Oscar for Best Documentary and was seen by many around the world, if not France. As one writer put it, the film had the rare distinction of both being about history and making history. I'd like to close this part of my discussion with a rather lengthy section from the film, which summarizes what it was like for a Jew in Vichy.
Petit bourgeois, j'allais au lycée Pasteur, mais enfin pour moi la question juive n'existait pas, nous n'étions pas des religieux. Et quand j'ai appris que j'étais juif par les autres, j'ai d'abord été extrêmement triste de me sentir rejeté de ma communauté nationale et de ce pays que j'aimais, non pas parce que j'y étais né, mais parce que j'avais appris à les mettre à la son histoire que je trouvais belle. Et j'ai commencé à m'intéresser aux juifs. Et je crois que vouloir discuter sur les chiffres, c'est faire du compte difficile dans un domaine où c'est inadmissible. Le fait qu'un gouvernement français ait accepté de livrer des nationaux français et même des ressortissants qu'il avait à protéger, reniant le droit d'asile traditionnel de la France, prouve que ce n'était pas un gouvernement digne de porter l'étiquette française et ce que nous aimons dans cette patrie dans la France. La France a collaboré, c'est le seul pays d'Europe qui a un gouvernement qui ait collaboré, d'autres ont signé des armistices, ont capitulé en basse campagne, c'est le seul pays d'Europe qui a un gouvernement qui a collaboré, qui a instauré des lois qui, sur le plan raciste, allaient plus loin que les lois de Nuremberg, puisque les critères racistes français étaient encore plus exigeants que les critères racistes allemands, et c'est donc pas une très belle page. C'est normal que dans les manuels scolaires, on nous présente que la page glorieuse, du point de vue historique, c'est certainement faux. Moi, j'ai été arrêté parce que j'étais FTP. Oui, j'étais arrêté au cours d'une action à ma armée. À 16 ans. Oui, 17 ans. Par les policiers français, qui m'ont pas torturé, mais interrogé pendant 18 jours de façon, disons, physique. Je suis resté 1 an donc, dans une prison française. J'ai vu fusiller dans la cour de cette prison 7 de mes camarades, de mon groupe d'ailleurs, par des pelotons de gendarmes français. Et j'ai été livré au SS avec tous mes compagnons de prison le 2 juillet 1944 par l'administration pénitentiaire française, qui est la seule en Europe à avoir fait ce geste ignoble de pieds et poings liés tous les détenus des prisons. J'ai été déporté par un train qu'on appelait le train de la mort parce qu'il est resté 2 mois sur les voies, enfin attaqué, mitraillé par l'aviation anglaise qui ne savait pas qu'il était déporté. J'ai pu m'en évader le 25 août 1944. Et il est arrivé à Tachot le 27 août. Et c'est à ce moment-là que j'ai appris que mes parents étaient... j'ai recherché mes parents que j'avais quittés depuis 4 ans et j'ai appris qu'ils avaient été déportés. La France était couverte de camps de concentration, Argelès, Rivesaltes, Fort-Barreau, Drancy, enfin des noms il y en a très nombreux. Il y avait d'ailleurs pas que des Juifs, il y avait des républicains espagnols, des Juifs francs-maçons, il y avait des Gitans. Et tout ce monde était livré par petits paquets aux Allemands au fur et à mesure des convois et des demandes. Alors, les gens qui ont participé à ces persécutions ont été assez nombreux, sans parler de ceux qui ont participé indirectement pour des raisons d'intérêt personnel et qui étaient contents de voir disparaître un concurrent. Nous avons par exemple retrouvé 130 lettres de dénonciation au commissariat aux questions juives. Je peux vous dire, sur ces 130 lettres, la moitié émanait de médecins qui dénonçaient à la Gestapo ou au commissariat aux questions juives un tel ou un tel qui les gênait dont la concurrence les gênait.
It's not a very happy picture of what life was like. Now, in addition to the sorrow and the pity, other factors led to a reconsideration of the Vichy syndrome and the collective amnesia. Among those were trials of various officials, some of whom, as you might have read with respect to some Germans, what happened in Germany, became rather high-ranking officials in the French government after the war. Ultimately, as Eleanor has said, in 1995, Jacques Chirac, who was the president of France, made a statement which was so significant, it was covered internationally. And here you see it on the front page of the New York Times. I'll just play this for a minute because it's in French, but it's worth seeing.
Madame, Monsieur, bonsoir. Jacques Chirac a présidé la cérémonie commémorant le 53e anniversaire de la rafle du Veldiv. Pour la première fois, le chef de l'État a pris la parole pour reconnaître la responsabilité de l'État français dans les déportations des Juifs et lancer un appel à la vigilance contre toutes les intolérances.
He's saying that for the first time, the French are taking responsibility for the deportation of the Jews, and that there's a need to have vigilance about further intolerance.
Nathalie Saint-Cric.
Jour anniversaire de la rafle du Veldiv, les 16 et 17 juillet 1942, quelques 10 000 hommes, femmes et enfants juifs furent arrêtés par la police française puis déportés. La rafle avait pour nom de code vent printanier. Et en ce jour de commémoration, Jacques Chirac est revenu sans ambiguïté sur cette époque, Vichy, où, je cite, la France manquant à sa parole, livrait ses protégés à leur bourreau.
Ces heures noires souillent à jamais notre histoire et sont une injure à notre passé et à nos traditions.
This is the translation of the text. And you can read it. The key being the criminal madness of the occupying forces was supported by the French people, by the French state. This was written 53 years after the roundup of the Veldiv. Now, you now have a basic idea of what happened during the war and why the Vichy regime is viewed as it is now. Just a few years after Chirac's statement, as Eleanor said, the plaques started to be put up, and sometime thereafter, Eleanor began her project. I'd like now to talk a little bit about why I think that project is of really exceptional significance, more so than many others involving memory, memorials, and monuments. Now, there's a pause here because I don't really know what the difference is between a memorial and a monument. The terms are often used interchangeably, although academics have tried to distinguish the two by suggesting that they serve different functions. They say that memorials serve as a way to preserve memories and pay respect to the figures and occasions that have affected our past. Monuments, on the other hand, are designed to commemorate notable accomplishments and to identify major historical events. Well, the dictionary seems to disagree. This is Webster's. What we do know is that monuments and memorials have been with us for time immemorial, if you pardon the pun. This is a site in Iraq called the in Turkey, called the Göbekli Tepe. It's approximately 10,000 years old, and it's believed to be the oldest known memorial to a particular event. In particular, it was some type of a temple in the Neanderthal period. This is called the Stele of the Vultures, which is actually in the Louvre Museum, and it's most likely the world's earliest war memorial. It's 45,000 years old, and it's in ancient Mesopotamia, and it features carvings that depict scenes from a victory of one Sumerian state over the other. Since that time, memorials have arisen throughout the world. Some are very grand, some are less so. Some merely bring attention to one's attention to a connection of a particular person to a particular place. Some mark the loss of countless lives. By the way, for those of you who don't know, this is a monument in Singapore, memorial commemorating the death of many people during the Japanese occupation. This is a monument in Armenia to the Armenian genocide. This is the Hiroshima Peace Park Monument. This is the monument to the Warsaw Ghetto fighters in Warsaw, Poland. This is the Vietnam Memorial. And this is a monument to just a few people. However, what they all share are certain characteristics. They are public, they are location specific, and they are designed to trigger or preserve memories. Academics speak of the purpose for these monuments, but quite frankly, I have found most of the materials that I've read rather trite or mawkish. Some say that the monuments are there to offer a physical space where individuals can confront the past and honor victims. Others say that they invite dialogue and interpretation, creating spaces for collective reflection about the moral implications of human behavior. And there are also those that say that, of course, the Holocaust and genocide memorials play a crucial role in educating future generations about the consequences of hatred and intolerance. Now, I do believe that Holocaust education is important, and I believe that all history education is important. But quite frankly, I don't think that teaching future generations about the consequences of hatred and intolerance will make them that much more loving and tolerant than other generations that preceded them. Similarly, of course, it is important to remember, but precisely what is it that we're being asked to remember? The events, the individuals who died, the individuals who committed the crimes, our personal relationships to the events. Might I, a child of Polish Holocaust survivors, respond differently to an a la Mémoire painting than would someone who has no relationship to it at all? These are all very difficult questions about which there are really no answers. However, I want to explain why I believe that, notwithstanding the ability to define with precision the importance of the project, and aside from its aesthetic significance, it advances actual personal, social, and moral values that are terribly significant. First, the plaques themselves will definitely help shape what some theoreticians have called collective memory. That is, many French will, through the exposure to the plaques, develop a belief regarding the Pétain regime, which will be largely negative. As such, it will push them, edge them towards political positions that reject ideals that are associated with Pétain. Indeed, that's precisely what happened a short time ago when a right-wing candidate for president, Zemmour, in France, sought to obtain support by arguing that Pétain should be rehabilitated and that he would actually help save Jews during the war. He was roundly defeated, not necessarily because of the plaques alone, of course, but because of the teaching of history of which the plaques were a part. Next, turning to the project itself, it is exceedingly rare in that it is not site-specific. As mentioned, most monuments are tied to a place, and images of them shown elsewhere have very little resonance. However, while the paintings themselves speak of highly specific places, specific schools, or other locations in Paris, they can be transferred elsewhere, carrying with them the reverberating echoes of the plaque's messages. Would they have greater impact in a museum in Paris than one in California or Singapore? Probably, no doubt. But even online, they are deeply moving. And that is because they are not the plaques themselves, but works of art based upon the plaques. In other words, images of the plaques themselves, as shown online, are just unengaging photos on a computer screen. However, the paintings draw you in. They are art. They draw you in too because they require work to understand. Take a look at this image. We looked at it at the beginning. Just looking at it, you wouldn't know what it is. You have to really go into it, and you have to read the text, and you have to find the text. And you have invested time and effort in learning what it says. And as you do that, having invested that time and effort, you ascribe greater meaning to the work. Finally, as Eleanor pointed out, unlike most other memorial imagery, her paintings help you understand why exactly you're looking at the paintings. Take a look at this painting. Again, you have the names of the 13 very small children. As she said earlier, quoting another plaque, passerby read their names. Your memory is their only monument. What does that mean? It means that without our preserving their memory, they're gone. There's nothing of those people that exists any longer. We are asked to bear a heavy burden if we are to remember that. But it's one that we as individuals have a moral obligation to bear. These paintings and the project reminds us of that obligation. Thank you again for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Daniel.
On that cheery note.
Thank you. That was an awesome presentation, Daniel, and I know that it has required a lot of research to distill so many facts and so much history into these few minutes, and thank you for sharing with us. Eleanor, do you have anything that you wish to add?
I want to say one thing. I was going to prepare a bibliography.
Oh,
I don't know, seriously, I didn't know whether anybody was interested in it. But if anybody was, Dorothy, let me know and I'm happy to provide it. It's not a heavy one, but there's some sites that are very easy to access and you might find them interesting.
yeah, I think there is some people expressing interest in the comments. So maybe what we can do is you can email it to me and then I will forward to everyone.
Okay.
Okay. So without, yes, thank you. There's a lot of thank yous going on in the chat. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm very, very pleased to announce to you that the website is now live. The link is in the chat, theartofletters.com. So let me share with you what happens when you go to the website. This is what you will see. And you can see visit now. When you go in, you are going to see the gallery wall right here. Just look at that. It's amazing. There's an amazing array of textures and colors. So when you click on any one of these art, you will go into another view that will show you the caption in French and then the English translation. And here is a beautiful full-size image that you can zoom in and look at all the details. So I welcome you to the show, Eleanor. Thank you so much for sharing this art with us. It's just my heart was in pieces throughout this sharing. Daniel, thank you. There is a question. How did you meet Paul, Eleanor? This question is for you. How did you meet Paul that showed you the plaques inside the school and the parks?
No. Some years ago, when I was beginning to develop the project, when I realized sometime after I had been working on it, maybe for 2 or 3 years, I realized I had a project. And before that, I was making pieces of art and putting them aside. And at some point, I knew I had a block of work that I thought I should do something with. And someone introduced me to a wonderful woman here in Paris named Roselyne Kraft, who might be out there listening to us. And Roselyne had a lot of connections in the Jewish community, including some Holocaust survivors. And she brought me to the Shoah Museum to meet some people there. And I think it was at the Shoah, which is the museum, the Holocaust Museum in Paris, that I met someone who knew Paul. I think it was like that. And so little by little, I got to know a few of the Holocaust survivors. And this is, almost 10 years ago. So I'm not even sure if most of those people are still around, but one of those was Paul, who was, as I said, he was very energetic and very lively, and also, in his mid 80s at that point. And he said, "Let me show you some things in Paris." So I was very, I was delighted to take him up on his offer. So that's how I met Paul. He spoke only French, and my French was a little bit so-so at the time. So I had to struggle a bit to understand, but I certainly knew what he was showing me.
Thank you. There are a lot of comments. So far, no question. Karen says she thinks that the discussion about the memory Daniel has added room for thought, contributing to her appreciation of Eleanor's work. And she felt more of a story contributing to the work in the memory of these people, the children and adults who were abandoned and killed during the war. Yeah, so it's true. A lot of comments about how this has been very informative, very important, very interesting. So yes, thank you. I don't know how to end this because there is a lot of emotions. I just wanted to say, everyone, thank you for sharing this very important time with us, and I really hope that you will join us for the subsequent talks. Because art in the service of memory, it's quite a wide topic, and the way that we remember things that are important to us may not be just national. Sometimes it can be your personal history. It can be your community, things that are important to you. And so we will be sharing, the talks will be sharing on those topics. And the upcoming one on Friday, it will be shared by a lady who is the head of the art collection at the Auschwitz Museum. I think that is going to be very, very outstanding, because the prisoners, they were creating art under very severe, the risk of severe punishment, and yet they could not stop producing the art. They drew portraits of each other, they drew memories of their lives of freedom, and they also drew their lives in prison, and that formed a very important and a very emotional historical record, because, as you know, I think photography was not really allowed. So this is one of the important documents that we have about what went on in the prison camps. So I hope that you will come and join us. That would be this Friday. Yeah.
May I say two things?
Please.
So first, I really would like to thank Dan for an extraordinary lecture. I thought that was brilliant, and gave us so much to think about. With all of my involvement in this history, there's so much I don't know, and I really appreciate your being so clear and direct, and also analyzing things in ways that the books often don't. So I appreciate that. And just the second thing I want to mention is, which I'm saying something Dorothy was about to say, but next Saturday, I'm going to be doing another presentation, and this one is especially for those of you out there who are either calligraphers or artists or have some interest in what calligraphy, how it's made, because what I'll be talking about, which I carefully didn't really mention today, is how I actually made these paintings, because they have a lot of different materials and a lot of different layers of work on them. And I think for those of you who are involved with artwork, this will actually give you an opportunity to ask me some questions. I don't keep secrets. I don't say, oh, that's my, my secret formula. I'm happy to share all that information. So, okay.
So everyone, thank you so much. Thank you again for joining us. And big round of applause for Eleanor and Daniel.
Thank you.
Yeah, so please enjoy the show, go into the exhibition and, read the captions, look at the images, and join us for the talks that are upcoming. And we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, one more thing, excuse me, Dorothy, the show is available now 24 hours a day, is that right?
Correct.
Oh,
Yes.
and how can they can just go to the website and they'll find it?
Yes. So
Okay.
you can, it will be up there 24/7 until the 20th of August. And I will be uploading the video recording on the Art of Letters YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube, you just have to search for the Art of Letters and you will find us there. It's quite simple. Yeah, thank you again, everyone. I'm going to stop.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.